So right this second, we're just doing some tech work. I do want to eventually turn this into a discussion of the Marvel annual events, things like Atlantis Attacks or um, like Evolutionary War that I'm actually reading through right now, and it's going to be the subject of our first daily talk when it comes to these annual events. Mainly just want to see what this looks like and probably play around with a different camera. So yeah, this is a new thing for me. Got to kill about 30 minutes. So like back in the day, Marvel used to have events a lot more confined than they are now. Yeah, like confined is probably the best way to put it. They would come out in just the annuals. It really wouldn't bleed over into like huge, multiple miniseries crossover ideas. It was like, hey, once a year we get these like double-sized books that we'll kind of bring everybody together for, which is neat. But everyone kind of forgets about them. But there's things in them that are kind of important. Kind of like Evolutionary War. Overall, the miniseries doesn't do much that affects the current Marvel universe. But hidden in those annuals is the history of the High Evolutionary. And spoiler warnings, it's about the birth of, well, one of the things that happens is the birth of Pietro and Wanda. And you get to see how they ended up on Wandagore Mountain and how they got with the Maximoffs and why their last name was Maximoff and, that kind of stuff. But overall, the miniseries in and of itself is, or the event is kind of underwhelming from what I've read. I've read most of it. I'm 2 issues shy of finishing the whole thing. And at the end of that, I don't know. We're going to probably move on to Atlantis Attacks, which is the more famous of the annual events. But I'm just kind of trying to get an idea of what it was like back in the day for Marvel. I will say Marvel Unlimited helps me dig through all this so I don't have to actually track down all these books. Some of them are a little pricey. Some of them are just not pricey, but just hard to get a hold of because they're at this point 30, 40 years old. So yeah, having Marvel Unlimited was awesome and makes a lot of these conversations possible. Marvel or DC Universe is going to be happening as well eventually once I get that subscription up and running. So yeah, kind of quiet here in the background. My lighting is horrible. But it's all right. I have other people watching. That's neat. I didn't think I made this public yet. That's interesting. Well, hello, people that are watching. So yeah, back in the day, Marvel used to do yearly events, kind of like they do now. Hi there. Not bad for just trying this room out in the house. Ended up with a spare room all of a sudden, so trying to record from here. I'll be playing around with some stuff later, different camera, probably try to work with the lighting a bit better. But yeah, it's like, so Marvel's always done yearly events. It's not something that happened after Avengers Disassembled. It's not something that happened after Siege. They didn't. It wasn't always so blatant, like event A leads to event B, event C. It was kind of constrained to the annuals, which are things that have kind of gone by the wayside anyway, as well. It's like once a year they'd have big giant, like double sized books where they just let the creators go crazy with them. Things like Evolutionary War, Atlantis Attacks, like the Darkhold was one as well. But anyway, I'm going to try to work my way through those and see if we're missing anything by not doing it in that style anymore. If Evolutionary War is anything to judge it off of, we're not missing anything. I'd rather have dedicated events that run longer than a month. So that way, all the books that are a part of this event actually feel like they're part of this event and actually have characters that feel like they belong, because the Punisher annual for Evolutionary War was really weird. You got Frank taking on its super advanced tech warframes with AK-47s, and granted, some of the story there is pretty good. It's just he's so out of place. The Spider-Man books are well done stories, and they do kind of like follow the events of the Punisher book in like a tangential way. But again, Spidey's not directly confronting the High Evolutionary. He's kind of like fighting the grunts in New York. Now, one thing that the annual events did was kind of like introduce new characters. So during this, you get the introduction of Speedball. Decent character, kind of has fallen by the wayside. Was a new warrior, was kind of blamed himself for Civil War, turned into penance for a while, and I think he's back to Speedball now. I don't know. I need to go back and look up that one. But anyway, you get like some of him interacting with like Spidey and Daredevil, but you don't get his actual backstory. He just sort of like, hi, I have powers, and I'm not really a superhero, but I don't know how to use my powers yet. So he kind of just like that part of the annual, Spider-Man's annual ends up being more about Speedball than it does the story between Spider-Man and Daredevil. It's kind of like second fiddle. Then the second Spider-Man book, second Spider-Man annual, has Pete once again dealing with like the grunts of the High Evolutionary, but it's more connected to the stuff that happened in the other book and in Punisher. Overall, it's interesting, but it has nothing to do with Evolutionary War. And the sad thing is, most of the event isn't like with the name Evolutionary War. You think there's going to be like this huge conflict between him and everybody else, but it's all bits and pieces, with people not as involved as you would think. There's not much of a fight between the High Evolutionary and everybody else so far. He kind of like shows up. The main people in the book deal with whatever henchmen or side dudes he's kind of thrown in their way, and he sort of just stands back and is like, aha, this was all part of my plan, even if it looks like he failed. It's all part of my plan. Like the best thing so far, the two things have been pretty good. The history of the High Evolutionary has been pretty interesting. It's definitely like mid 80s kind of like cheesy comic backstory, super science, and it's like super science and no one understands me and I shake my hand at the gods kind of thing. So it's been, which is actually kind of cool. I'm an old game. I'm an old comic geek, so that kind of stuff just like it's very nostalgic. It's warm. It's the Tall House cookies of comic watching or reading. These are things I am comfortable with. But I don't. It probably wouldn't fly much now, just because it's such a broad brush that a villainy. There's not enough nuance in his character at all. But the coolest thing was, through that backstory, you get some other things too. Like this is like where they solidify the Maximoff stuff. Like I said before, with Wanda and Pietro, you get to find out how they made it to Wendigo Mountain and why they were there and how they ended up with their Roma family, because we don't use the term that is all over this book whenever they're talking about the Maximoffs anymore, which is appropriate because not cool. So yeah. Other thing, like the very first part of this is an X Factor's annual. It's like their first annual or their second annual, something like that. Absolutely, they could add. They absolutely could add new depth. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have deeper characters. It's that every once in a while you want that. You want those warm cookies. You want it to be able to like sit down and not have to be like, this dude's a bad guy because science. And not every villain needed a back. Not every villain needs to have 10 layers of depth and tragic backstory and just misguided just for one choice could have been the hero. Not that I have a problem with any of that in like the modern day. I do like how more in depth the writing has gotten. It's just every once in a while you want the warm cookies and you go back and you pop up in the old books and you're like, all right, this was a little simpler time. The writing was meant to be very bombastic. It was meant to be at like middle school level, maybe just graduating elementary school level. It's to grab you and pull you in and just give you these completely empty calories of enjoyment. And reading through the stuff, it definitely gives me that feel. Now, going back and rereading runs of this kind of stuff, just like with that nostalgia and those cookies and stuff, man, after a while it gets to be too much. These annuals, though, they are just right in the amount of goodness it gives you. But X Factor first or second annual, which was the first part of the Evolutionary War, I had never read this before, and I hadn't really done like any like wiki research or anything, because it's an event that doesn't actually matter anymore, I'm guessing, or at least it doesn't get talked about a lot, if ever. But in this, you see the High Evolutionary like back in the back, but he's ticked off Apocalypse. Like Apocalypse is like, oh, we don't force evolution. No, we let the strong survive, blah, blah, blah. And it's just these two dudes having a conversation while X Factor's like destroying and wiping out all of High Evolutionary's grunt dudes, helping out the subterranean dudes, the mole people. And you get like this really good conversation and this discussion between Apocalypse and the High Evolutionary about which is the best way to advance civilization. And High Evolutionary is like, I'm just going to turn everybody. I'm just going to boom, hit them with this thing, and I'm going to evolve all of humanity, and we're going to be the best we can be. And Apocalypse is like, but you're not forging them in fire. You're just going to give them all this stuff, and it's going to fall apart in the end. And kind of at the end of the book, Apocalypse is kind of right, and that takes off the High Evolutionary. But there's no conversation of this in the rest of the event. Like he never goes back and is like, oh man, that discussion I had with Apocalypse, that really bothered me. I hated that he was right, that it was through the fire of adverse conditions that the mole people were able to evolve. and have a higher sense of understanding. And it's just, that book set up expectations for this event that were not met by the end of it. And so far there's been some high points and low points in the books. Like the quality of writing is good, but I don't think everybody got in the same room and talked about what this event was supposed to happen. Like everyone got the cliff notes, bullet point A, B, C, and D. And taking bullet point A, B, C, and D, everyone kind of went off and wrote their own stuff. And it all kind of, it works mostly. But so there's a lot of really good writers in this stuff. Chris Claremont's part of this, of course, because the X-Men are part of it. Grunwald, just like the people you would want writing the books for this kind of thing are writing these books, but I don't think everybody talked to each other. So yeah, this is kind of like, I'm doing this really short right now. Again, this is mainly a tech demo, but I kind of want to get into each of the books individually. And I think starting tomorrow, I'm going to. We're going to start with annual. Let me actually pull it back up here real quick. No, I'll let it set too long. It's X Factor Annual number 3 from 1986. That's going to be the book that I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. And we're going to dig more into this whole high evolutionary discussion with Apocalypse and the weird spot X Factor was at this point, because it was still the original X-Men, like their after college years on this new team. The other stories in there are actually really good too. There's some, I won't tell you everything. If you want to find it on Marvel Unlimited's got it. It's, by the way, this is not sponsored content, obviously, because I don't have anywhere near the gear for sponsored content yet. But yeah, $60 was definitely worth it already. It was interesting. They should have gone back and fought, or like, I should realize that Fox was right. They joined forces. See, that's what I thought was going to happen by the end of this. Like, Apocalypse was like going to pop up throughout this event, but he never shows up anywhere else in the event. Like, he's in the very first thing, and it seems like that would be the direction it would go. But nothing. And there's no big boss fight. Each book has its own individual boss fight. But unless these last 2 books, which I haven't actually finished the whole thing yet, because I'm kind of slow on right now, just because things have been snowed in and child. But the last 2 books, unless something really big happens there. Oh yeah, I think I could have sworn they've actually had a confrontation later on too. I have to look that up and dig around some more. These 2 characters should have butted heads at least more than once, just because their MOs are so similar. They just have slightly different ideas about how evolution of humans is supposed to go. But yeah, so if anybody checking this out after I post this from the live thing, if you happen to come across it, if you want to read along, X Factor Annual 3 from 1986. And I will try to be back tomorrow about this time, 7:00, and we can talk about it more. Session, thanks for showing up and being the only cheerleader for right now. Hopefully I can see you tomorrow.